Thank you for joining us. This is the first installment of something we're pretty excited about doing here. This is a combination and joint effort from several chapters of ProductTank, and this is the first in a series. Here we go. First in the series, you just got a preview of what we'll be seeing next month. But today, we're going to find out a little bit more about the book Aligned. And so just want to call out that we've got some folks here that will be from Charlotte, from the Raleigh and Triangle chapters, Nova and DC. Really appreciate everyone for being here. And several of us are here in Richmond as well, joined by Bruce McCarthy and Melissa Appel. Why don't we get them in here? So Melissa. Melissa is an author, speaker, executive coach at Product Culture. And then let's join Bruce into the conversation.
Hey, everybody.
Bruce is also now a multi-author, speaker, and founder at Product Culture. And what I want to do today is we want to learn about the origin story of Aligned and ask a lot of good questions here. So to do that, what I'd like to do is instead of getting started and asking about bios, we've included bios. I think several of us have seen, read, and linked to socials. So what I think is always interesting is product is so unique. Nobody goes to school for it. Well, now you can start to go to school for it, but the product path is always different for everyone's career. So what I'd love to do is open it up and learn a little bit about each of you through how did you get here? When did you find out product was right for you?
For me, it was kind of accidental. I had been in marketing, I had been in sales, I had done a startup in nothing to do with tech, in home environmental detection. And so I'd kind of played a whole bunch of roles. I'd done product development, I'd done the marketing and the sales and the business plan and all of that stuff. And when my startup crashed and burned, as many do, I took a job in a software company, and the title was product manager, but I'd never heard of the title before. And I just sort of sounded like a marketing job to me and nobody contradicted me during the interview process. But I quickly found out that it was a lot like being an entrepreneur. It incorporated all those different parts and of the machine of making something of value that you then could market and sell and deliver. And that's what I loved about it. It was like being in charge of a startup within a larger organization. And so that I figured out what it was, and I fell in love with the job because of all the multiple pieces of it. But I also quickly found out that the hardest part of the job was that nobody reports to you. So you have to lead this team like you're in charge of a startup, but nobody has to do what you say. So you have to figure out how to get them to want to do what you say, or at least something that all fits together into some whole that they're willing to do. And I got some feedback once at some point in my career where somebody in engineering asked me to come to a meeting that they were having with some engineering counterparts. And I asked them, why do you want me? I'm not in engineering. This sounds like a thing you and the other engineers need to talk about. And he's like, yeah, but you have this way of framing up the space, the problem, the why we're here, that would be super useful just to set the stage for this meeting. And yeah, I can take it from there. But if you could just do that part, like that connecting the dots for people, that I feel like would be super useful. And I had to reflect on that and realize that that is actually not just something that happens automatically. It's something you need to consciously do, think about, plan for, and practice. And that's in my head, that's sort of the earliest notion that I ever had that there was something that people needed to learn that might eventually, that in retrospect, eventually turned into this book.
Love that. How about you, Melissa?
So my product origin story, I actually started off, I have an undergrad degree in mechanical engineering, and I started off designing physical products. And then at some point, I went to work for a CAD company because I was hired essentially as an expert user because I had been using CAD to design physical products. So now they're like, well, you can now design the software that you used to use, right? Luckily, I figured out how to do that. But my title was product definition specialist, which I thought was kind of amusing because that's what I did. I defined the product. And I only sort of realized what that job meant after I was doing it for a couple of years. That's also where I learned what UX was. But I think a lot of people of a certain age sort of fell into product management almost by accident. Now you can get a degree in it, I think. But it was, yeah, I did it by mistake and realized I liked it.
Awesome.
I think a lot of people have had that experience. Maybe if you've been in product only a couple of years, it's become much more well-known.
Yep.
But if you got into it a decade ago, 2 decades ago or longer, then it's not a job that people really knew anything about or maybe had never heard of.
Right.
And so you find out on the job rather than saying, that sounds good. You're like, oh, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. The first role for me that was a product role, it wasn't called that. Right. The first thing that was close was a digital producer before the term product manager really caught on. So.
Yeah.
So let's start shifting towards the origins of the book. Where did it come from, right? What really inspired Aligned, and how did you all team up even?
You want to tell that one?
Yeah, so I had been thinking about a book for a while. Initially, it was How to Say No to Stakeholders. And it was because there were two people on my team at the time with opposite problems. One said no to everything and never gave a reason, and people were confused. And the other one said yes to everything, knowing he couldn't actually deliver, and ended up disappointing a lot of people. So I said, listen, there's a better way, right? And I was sort of repeating myself for a number of different people. I said, I just need to start writing this down. So I thought about the people I knew who had written books. I knew somebody who wrote like young adult sci-fi books. I knew somebody who wrote parenting books. And I'm like, do I know anybody who's written a business book? And Bruce and I actually met because we had worked together in the Boston Product Management Association. And so I said, well, Bruce has written a book. So I called him up and I said, what's your biggest piece of advice to somebody who wants to write a book? And he said, the best thing I did with my last book was to find a co-author who had already written a book. So I said, Bruce, do you want to write another book? And the rest was history.
Yeah, I kind of walked into that. But with my eyes open, because I kind of knew what question would be coming next, right? And I knew Melissa, and I knew that I'd be happy to work with her. And I really did like the idea of the book, because the last book that I had written was about product road mapping. And product road mapping sounds like maybe it's a technical thing. You got to figure out what features you're going to build in what order. But it really isn't. It's really much more of a team effort. It's really much more about developing alignment around a strategy. And that's what informs what goes on the roadmap. And I discovered in trying to teach road mapping that a lot of the questions I got were about that part, were about how do I get the right people in the room? How do I decide who to involve? When in the process do I involve them? How do I get them to be interested in doing this thing with me when it's not part of their day job? How do I resolve the fact that everybody wants everything for their team and don't really care about anybody else's priorities? All of it was the soft skills of alignment. A lot of the questions, the technical aspects are straightforward. The formatting is, there's a limited number of ways you can format a roadmap. That's not the real issue. The real issue is alignment. I was teaching a workshop and going through some of these techniques, and just in the Q&A session, because we'd gone through all the mechanics, and the person said, oh, this is the thing we need instruction on. This is the thing we need a workshop on. So when Melissa came to me and said, maybe there's a book about dealing with alignment of stakeholders, even though the initial idea was just about the no, it just made sense. It just clicked right into place. It feels like, honestly, it feels like the missing manual for product people.
That's great. You stole one of my questions because I wanted to ask about some specific moments, but it sounds like it was really a culmination of lots of different experiences and lots of different moments and working in different situations that really, but there had to be critical mass. Where was it? Was it just, well, for you, Bruce, I think it was Melissa showing up and saying, hey, I want to do this, but.
That was the tipping point for me, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I looked for a book on this topic because I wanted to buy it for the people on my team, and I just couldn't find one.
Yeah, that's a good reason. That's market fit, right?
The other thing was I had written a blog article years ago, and the title was "Don't Hire Product Managers Because They're Technical." And I was trying to make the case that all these skills of communication and alignment and figuring out what is really important and using the expertise of others in figuring out what's important and what people are willing to align on. This is all the communications part of the job. It's all the soft skills part of the job. And I went through and thought about all the things that a product manager is responsible for and ranked communication skills, listening skills, alignment and persuasion versus I know the technology of my product, I know the market that we operate in, et cetera. And really those soft skills kept coming to the top. That for me, it's the substrate on which everything else operates. It's the enabler for discovering what you need to know about the technology or the market.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I wanted to ask how you think this book fills a gap between hard skills and I don't like soft skills, I like human skills. But you touched on that a little bit. Melissa, you talked about looking for books. Are there resources that you found? Were you even close?
I mean, there's all sorts of like leadership and management kind of books, but we couldn't find any that were specifically around aligning stakeholders on like what you're going to build or what problems you're going to solve. And so I think that's the gap that we filled here. I'm just thinking back to how I knew that this was something that people needed help with. And at one company where I worked, we did performance reviews around 4 categories. There was like driving results, there was creativity, there was team building, and then there was this like communication and persuasion category. And when I first saw that, I'm like, how do I do this persuasion thing? Like I'm getting, reviewed on my ability to persuade people. I don't think I've sort of thought about that before. And so, there's books on the other kinds of things, right? There's books on team building, management books, there's books on results, there's books on, processes to get creative and things, but there wasn't really a resource that I could find around, communication and persuasion within the product management realm.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, just logically, you get into a meeting and you're going to do the planning process, right? And then at some point, you realize that people in the room have different priorities and you can't accommodate them all. What happens then? Somebody has to persuade somebody else. We're not going to just automatically agree. Or maybe we'll pretend to agree. We call this in the book shallow alignment, but we're not really agreed. And so people aren't going to follow through. So these are real problems. Now, on the other hand, there were some other books that we really liked and borrowed bits from that were sort of component pieces of doing this job well. Like Melissa, you really liked a lot of what Brené Brown wrote.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, there are elements from various different places. Like Brené Brown's talks about vulnerability and psychological safety, and thinking about how you form good, working, productive relationships with the people at your work. And you have to be able to talk with people without the fear of being reprimanded, right? People think vulnerability is just like getting in a room and talking about your emotions, but it's really not. It's being able to talk about what's really going on without a fear of like being embarrassed about it. And similar to psychological safety, you need to be able to say what you're thinking, to criticize, to make a mistake without fear of being reprimanded. And even in a company where the culture is such that people are reprimanded for making mistakes, you can at least try to build those kinds of relationships in small groups or one-on-one. And that's there are elements like that we brought in from all different places and kind of brought them together to tell a story about building relationships and building products.
For me, one of the books that I leaned on in thinking about point of view and understanding someone else's point of view and handling differences in the way people think or communicate was this book called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. And this is a terrific book that maps out a bunch of cultures, like the UK versus the US versus France versus Israel versus China or Japan, and how everyone is, of course, an individual, but there are patterns and tendencies from culture to culture that are different. And so, for example, respect for authority or hierarchy is stronger in the Far East than it is here in Western countries. And in particular, there are countries like the Netherlands, where things are meant to be very, very egalitarian, and they really do not lean on rank or tier of authority, but instead talk about things in a much more egalitarian fashion. And you need to adjust your communication style and your assumptions about where the other person is coming from based on what you know about or can discover about the culture that exists in their head and in their organization, which may be informed by where they grew up.
Yeah, that's great. We touched on a couple of different areas so you touched on a couple of different resources. Are there any other resources or frameworks that you kind of leverage to build upon or maybe even challenged in some ways?
I mean, a lot of the frameworks in the book we've come up with ourselves just from having done the job for so long. One of the frameworks that we borrowed from was DISC, D-I-S-C. And if anyone's familiar with that, it's, one of these personality test kind of things. But we applied it to how people make decisions as a useful framework to figure out, the persuasion thing. Because, for example, some people make decisions, they want a lot of data. They don't want to make a decision until they have all the information, right? And so for those people, you want to lay out all the data, you want to lay it out logically and make sure that we're coming to this conclusion in a logical way. Some people just want everybody to be happy. And so for those people, you might actually want customer quotations or something like that are more persuasive than a whole bunch of numbers. And so using some of these frameworks that are out there, but applying them to something slightly different can help you just figure out how to understand where other people are coming from.
There's another one that I like a lot, which is also starts with D. It's called DACY, and it's a lot like RACY, which most people have heard of, but it's specific to decision making. And I read about it years ago, and I realized that I had unconsciously been using it, and it was just helpful to have a framework that I could point to explain it. And DACY stands for, in decision making, the driver, the approver, the consulted, or the contributor rather, and the informed. So those last two are pretty similar to RACY. The driver, though, is the person who owns the decision, and it's closely allied with this notion of a DRI, a directly responsible individual, the person who holds the D, the decision-making right, and it makes it possible for decisions to happen more rapidly and more decisively because there is a clear owner. But there are also these other players, right? The owner still has to go to the contributors and make sure he understands or she understands their input, and acknowledges it and takes it into account. It's not a poll, it's not consensus, but it is consultation. And there's usually an escalation point if that driver makes a decision that everyone disagrees with. There's the approver who can, in an extreme circumstance, override the decision of the driver. And the reason I think this is important is so often what I see is that organizations drag their feet on making decisions because it's just not clear whose decision it is. And so people just keep arguing their points of view, and it never gets resolved because it's nobody's job to stop the debate and make a decision, other than maybe the CEO. And not every decision can be made by the CEO. So we just make an explicit designation of who owns the D on each type of decision, and also the responsibility to consult with stakeholders.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that one. Over the RACY, the distinction between DACY actually, I think is a helpful one. And I've appreciated that about the book. I'm not all the way through, I'm working my way through, but that you're taking some of these existing frameworks and starting to build upon them and help understand kind of the product aspect of really driving decision-making or alignment around around what you're trying to drive in your product decisions.
Yeah, I don't know if we've really invented any amazing new trick or science to stakeholder management. What I think we're doing is making you think about this stuff explicitly so that you can do it better, and providing tools and tips and reminders, and connecting the dots between all of them and saying, well, look, if you want to get from here to there, there's a process, and it might not be a technical process. It has all to do with humans, but you actually can think it through and check off the boxes as you go.
Yep. So this, it occurs to me that what we haven't done yet is really tease the storytelling aspect to this. In applying these different frameworks, I really have enjoyed the narrative around it. So tell me about IRI, without giving too many spoilers, I suppose, but tell me how IRI came to be and why you've chosen maybe to structure it this particular way.
The first version of the book didn't have an IRI. It didn't have a continuous story. And we were trying to figure out how to use examples throughout the book, right? Here's an example of this, here's an example of that. And the problem was that what we realized is that for all of these examples, especially in stakeholder management, we had to do so much explaining of the background of the relationship between the two people and this person, that person, that we're like, I feel like it would be a lot easier if we just had a set of characters that went throughout the whole book, because then you get to know them, just like you get to know your stakeholders at work, right, over time, and you have different situations, and you see how they react to this and how they react to that, and how they make decisions. And so that's where the story kind of emerged. And I think as soon as we decided we wanted a story, Bruce was like off and running, because he really enjoys the like narrative part of it, and he came up with like a lot of these characters, and and then we were talking about, okay, there's like the book and then there's the story, and it was a kind of a fun element to work on. And I think it works, because you really get to know people, the characters, and we've heard from some readers that they got a little bit of PTSD, especially with the character of Sparks, like, oh, I worked with a guy like that. Thanks for bringing it up again.
That's right. Thanks for opening old wounds. Right. No, you're absolutely right about that. That's sort of my memory of how it emerged as well. It originally emerged just kind of as a way of saving time explaining the background of every different example, just by having the same background for all of the examples. And I originally thought of it as maybe like a short little skit at the end of each chapter. But as soon as we got into it, and we had explained enough about the background, I realized this is totally different than the Roadmaps book, where we also had an example that we carried through. And at the end of each section, we would say, and here's how this would be shown in the roadmap for the Wombat garden hose, which was our example in the book. But because stakeholder management is so relationship driven, and because it sort of builds as Irie discovers more about each person and their needs and priorities and ways of thinking and ways of deciding things, and also discovers more about the situation of the company and what the drivers are there, that it seems now in retrospect, it seems inevitable that this would be a novel as well as a textbook, because you can't help but look back at your experience at a particular company trying to get stuff done as a kind of a story, as something that we all say, so who's going to play who in the movie? And it's kind of like that in real life. So I think that's inevitable.
Yeah, I think it also combines with the idea of personas, which we use a lot, in the product world. That it's
our
like
first draft had personas of different types of stakeholders, and we took that out essentially and replaced it with these characters.
Yeah, no, I actually forgot about that. You just mentioned we had like the archetypes of different, the personas of your stakeholders, and then we're like, well, this seems kind of stereotypical. Like, what if we actually told a real story about these people?
Yeah. And I'm glad we did, because like you said, people get emotionally involved with the characters, and we do get that comment about PTSD a lot. And then we also get people who are involved and they really want to know what happens at the end. And sometimes they like the ending and sometimes they don't.
Well, I'll hold my breath for that. I've absolutely enjoyed that, and I do agree that we learn best through our experience and retain better through the experience of storytelling. Actually, along that line, are there any stories, like specific stories or experiences that kind of shaped the narrative, or maybe even a handling of a specific topic or theme?
Well, the two things that come to mind for me is that there's this opening scene that as soon as you start reading the book, we hope will grab you. It's Irie's first day and her first meeting, and it does not go well. And everyone has been in that situation where it was supposed to be a routine meeting, it was supposed to be low stakes, and oh crap. So I won't say any more about that scene, but I encourage you to get started because of that. But the one that I kept trying to find places to insert, and that eventually we found a place, was a scene where Irie makes coffee for one of the difficult stakeholders, because she has learned that he's a coffee nerd. and she has some game in that respect. So she makes a human connection with him over coffee, over something innocuous like that. And doesn't fix everything, but it starts them on a positive path. And Melissa can tell you that she thought in the initial draft that I had geeking out over coffee too much in the book. But we picked one.
There were lots of coffee examples. Yeah. I'm not a coffee drinker myself. I drink tea. So, you know, it was.
So you're like, what is with all the coffee?
I'm like, I don't get it. I don't. I invite people for coffee and then I don't actually order coffee. So, but I think it's, you know, I enjoyed working on this book with somebody else because I think we balanced each other well, and we brought in kind of the different aspects. Like my book would have been completely devoid of coffee, and like that would have been a shame because I think that there's some useful stories there.
Yeah, well, and we learned about working together, treating each other as stakeholders, right? Because a book writing partner is like is a form of stakeholder, and we learned we have different styles over a lot of different things, right? I could tell when Melissa had edited some of my stuff at night, because she was tired and she didn't have any patience with being nice to me about it. She would just like change stuff and be like, no, this is way too long. Cut. And if she was fresher in the morning, she would still probably make all the same cuts, but she would just be nicer about it.
Be more pleasant about it. Yeah.
Right. And give me a little bit more reason why, right? Like the person who used to work for you.
Yeah. 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 No, it was, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was, you know, are there any topics, that's a good one, and that's a great little moment there. Are there any other topics that you felt like just worked so much better through the storytelling narrative that would have been very, you know, much more challenging outside of it?
We actually had to balance the narrative with the explanatory text, because sometimes we would put too much in the narrative and sometimes we would put too much in the explanatory, because it just felt better that way, but we needed to balance it out just for kind of consistency throughout the book. I'm trying to think of for some things we had like Ira explaining how to do things and we're like, well, that's probably going into too much detail in like a, you know, dialogue format. Let's bring that out and make a chart. But we kind of went back and forth on some of those.
Yeah. I'm having trouble thinking of a specific example.
Yeah, I can't think of a specific. I know we did that a bunch of times.
It was also, it went the other way too. Like we would find ourselves needing to come up with like 17 examples to explain how the disc would work in various different situations. And then we're like, well, or we could just tell it in the story and have Irie realize that when she talks to this person, bringing data works. And when she talks to that person, it just doesn't work. They have a just different way of thinking. And so a lot of the narrative came from showing rather than telling. And it also made things shorter because more immediately grabby, I think, and also shorter.
Let's talk about stories, right? So let's not spoil too much, but is there a favorite story within the book? That we talked about coffee, might be Bruce's.
Yeah, I mean, there was one scene where Ira is talking with these two stakeholders, and she says something, and one of them just like closes his laptop and leaves the room, and like just gets really upset and just like, I have somewhere to be. And you know, like some people have experienced something like that, maybe not quite that abrupt, but it helped Irie realize that she hadn't been talking about something the right way, or there was something she didn't know. And in that scene, she was able to gather from the other stakeholder who didn't abruptly leave, like what was going on, and realize that she didn't make a good enough connection with that stakeholder, like understand a situation that he was in and how to approach the problem. So I think that kind of thing illustrates some of the key principles of kind of being curious and getting to know people and not making assumptions and assuming good intent and all of this other stuff that, like, there's probably stuff that's going on somewhere that you don't know about. And I find that's helpful with, like, the people that I coach also. It's like, okay, well, your boss is doing this. Is it possible that their boss is asking them for something that's demanding, right? It's like trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand where they're coming from.
I have this friend who was, I run this forum for chief product officers. And so one of them was listening to another one describe a conversation with a stakeholder that went badly. And he was really just complaining. He was really just saying this was stupid and I can't believe this person was doing this. And this other member, my friend, said after a moment, do you think that this other stakeholder would describe the conversation the same way? And obviously the answer is no, but it forced this chief product officer to put himself in the other one's shoes and think about it from their point of view and come to the conclusion that he probably should have asked more questions to understand what was driving the other person's thinking. That worked out really well, actually, for him, because he had another meeting with this stakeholder coming up right after our session. And he reported that being curious turned out to be the smartest thing.
Great. Yeah, there were some really wonderful, touching moments in there. The one where he stormed out of the room, very human moment where you do have to reframe, and that was a good kind of teachable moment that I personally was like, oh, okay, got it. I see where this is going, and yes, I've definitely been there.
And Irie learns from that experience just the lesson that Melissa described about trying to make a human connection so that you can anticipate what might really touch a live wire for this person. But also she manages to turn it around by having an apologetic moment mutually between the two of them later in the story.
Right. Okay, let's take a step back a little bit. I'm curious about any particular chapter or topic, theme that was like difficult or challenging.
We went back and forth often over the org structure chapter because it seems like every organization is different and it's hard to generalize. I think we wrote it like 3 times at least.
Yeah, we changed around that diagram like 50 times. We're like,
right.
This makes sense. I don't know.
But again, it's one of those things that you don't think about a lot. You exist within the organization you exist within. And so it's kind of like you're a fish and you're in the water and you're swimming in the water and you don't think about the water. But it's worth mapping it out, I think. And so that we kept the chapter and we kept refining it to try to make it clearer and to play out the implications of that. Mostly it's which stakeholders matter in your world and how many of them do you have. In some structures like the stream-aligned teams, value stream teams, you have just a huge number of stakeholders and it can be challenging.
I think the ending was difficult to write too. We couldn't figure out how to wrap it up, which is why it's like we get various opinions on it. Maybe we should put out some alternate endings.
Well, that's something we could cover in. So we're going to do another session, right? After the book club, after everyone's read it, we could get sort of a reading on whether people were happy with the resolution, or we could see if we could source some alternate endings from the group.
Yeah, we were trying to avoid a Deus Ex Machina, which is like some godlike person like comes in and saves the day. So we were trying to like make sure Irie was the hero of her own story and not have some savior come in.
Right.
I think we did that. So, but it was like we were writing this business book and we're like, how should this character relationships resolve? It's like, is this even? But I think it's important, right? Because we're writing a book on character relationships.
That's right.
Got it. Okay, so we've got just time checking here. I want to go for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. We're gonna have a lightning round after that, and I do want to get to some of our ticket giveaway. We've got to get to that and talk about kind of why we're here and preview what's coming up. So, so let's kind of go back toward. Actually, I'm curious. We'll pull it back to like product management all over. Bruce, you talked about earlier. You talked about pulling different skill sets out within product management, but I'd be curious. So we'll just ask this, where does stakeholder management rank as a critical product skill? I've been thinking so much about this more recently is like AI. You see things about, how AI is going to upend product management, shift, consolidate, change. Gosh, as I think about stakeholder management, that is such a key skill.
Yeah.
Good luck getting your AI to manage your stakeholders for you.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. No, I've been thinking about that too in context of AI, which is like, what are the pieces of the job that AI really can't do a good job on? And that's like getting people on the same page, really.
Right.
You can use it for, hey, take all this customer feedback and come up with the problems they're trying to solve, or like, let's create a strategy that aligns with the corporate goals. But you're not going to be able to get AI to like get a group of executives to agree on what the corporate goals should be.
I'm just
right?
playing this out in my head. So you and your other stakeholders can't agree on anything. So each of you starts getting ChatGPT to give you better and better arguments to defeat the other people's arguments, right? And then eventually the AI figures out what's going on, goes to HR independently, and gets you all fired.
Oh gosh. What a timely book, right? What a timely book for us, because as we're trying to, look at how we are, AI proof, right? What parts of the job can AI do? What parts can it? And what a timely, book to come out and help coach us when there weren't, to your point, I have not seen any other resources like this. It's been, I've really taken quite a bit away from this book, and I certainly feel there are things within this book that I'll be using along those lines.
I think maybe you're right about the timeliness. I mean, we made a joke about it around AI, but I think that just illustrates the overall point, that really the difference between really successful product people and people who are just like your first job, Melissa, writing requirements,
right?
That may or may not go anywhere, is this stuff. It's the stakeholder management. And it might sound like politics, but I want to make the case that that's not it. That it's you have to, as a product person, get things done and get results through other people. Your job isn't write the specs, come up with the roadmap. Your job is get a result, and you need everybody else in order to make that happen.
Yeah, so curious. I've certainly found a lot. I know that this is, and I haven't been able to write them all down and rank them, but there are so many different tools and frameworks. And because you really run through a long journey, right, within the narrative, I can see myself coming back to this, finding bookmarks, looking at it as a reference tool. Are there any in here that are sort of your go-tos?
Oh, I use Daisy all the time with clients to force them to decide who decides on what. And a lot of companies, when they're sort of trying to move out of the startup founder-led phase into a real growing growth phase company, they struggle with that. They've never had to do it before. If they weren't sure who made the decision, just ask the founder. Well, at a certain point, 200 plus employees, that's just not feasible anymore. So we need just a little bit of process. So for me, I mean, I wrote a whole book on road mapping, so that would be where I would really start. But who determines what the roadmap is? Who owns it? So use something like road mapping or priorities or OKRs as a reason to get the right people together. But then the first thing you got to decide is who decides.
Yeah. I think for me, it's, I mean, especially as like a coach consultant, I use workshopping all the time. And it doesn't have to be a big production. It can just be a few people in a room just going through an exercise that gets them thinking and gets them, you know, seeing each other's perspectives. So I find that really useful. I think that when you get a bunch of people in a room, they almost immediately realize they're not totally on the same page. And there's certain techniques that you can use to get closer to that, or at least hear each other out and think sort of logically through whatever you're trying to accomplish there, whether it's, you know, coming up with ideas for something or defining what the problem is or deciding what the goals are going to be.
And there's a whole chapter in the book on workshopping, primarily drafted by Melissa. And there's a whole story about how Ira uses it a few times to get the team to alignment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, the saying no chapter, which was sort of my
Survived into the book, absolutely.
Impetus, to try to figure out how to, you know, not just how to say no, but how to involve your stakeholders in the process so that you can agree on a yes or no together. That's sort of the premise of that book.
And this is the other thing that I sometimes hear when people hear the word stakeholder management is they assume it's designed by committee or voting or some other thing where the product person is abdicating their responsibility. And just like allocating 20% of your features to each department, or taking a vote across the company or even the customer base about which features to build, that I totally agree. That's not what we're talking about. And we're talking, though, about taking advantage of the fact that other people have good ideas and other people have different points of view on the problem, and that you kind of need them to be on board if you ever want the marketing team to properly represent your product, or the sales team, or the support team. Why not bring them into not just the process, your process? You're still the leader of this effort. You're still probably the ultimate decision maker on most things, like what are we building? But ignore those people at your peril.
Yeah, it's the way I've been talking about it is it's hard for your stakeholders to reject, say, your roadmap if they were involved in creating it.
Right. Well said.
Okay, we want to switch gears based on time. So let's do this. I'm going to, a couple of things here. I want to remind everyone about our next visit. So we're giving you 6 weeks to go get the book, which, by the way, is discounted right now at Amazon. You can't beat it. I would say it's priced for your entire team. So go get it.
Yeah, I don't know how long that price will last. Amazon sets it at their whim.
Right. Yeah, so all the more reason. And as you do that, before you revisit with us on the 21st, there's a link within the meetup, your local meetup event page. There should be a link to submit your stories and feedback questions for us to work through next time. Next session will be much more like a workshop where we'll look through challenging, maybe stakeholder stories and start to take frameworks and ideas from the book and revisit those. I mentioned this one, and then we also have a pair of tickets that Product Fest is willing to let us give away today. I know we have multiple chapters within the Mid-Atlantic region, but we're going to bring Mary on in a few minutes to give the tickets away for us. Actually, Mary, if you want to talk about, so here's the QR code. We can bring Mary on. And this QR code, if you can quickly, so if you can get to Richmond on June 4th, I should have added that here. On June 4th, Product Fest is kind of the conference, a one-day, all-day unconference, we like to call it. I've got a couple slides here that Mary can talk through about what you could expect, but this QR code should get you to enter your name for the drawing, and then we'll do that right at the end. Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, hey, I was on mute. Sorry about that. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I just wanted to do one more shout out to Bruce and Melissa for talking about this book. And if I may say really, really quickly, because I have my copy right here.
Oh, I see your stickies, right?
Oh my goodness, I have so many pages bookmarked with the Post-its. But I have to say, for me, if I were to summarize this experience of reading this book thus far, it is a masterclass in human psychology, especially in business environments. And the biggest nuggets I took away are that aligning with shareholders or stakeholders on when to say no together is so important. And so much so, for those of you that don't have the book yet, this is an entire page, and the only word on this giant red page is the word no. So,
that was the brainchild of our book designer.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I loved it when I was flipping through when I first got it. I'm like, oh my goodness, there's an entire page that is red, and all it says on it is no. And then the kind of the summary at the end where it says your superpower is the collaborative culture you develop. So if you all want to hear, so thank you again, Bruce and Melissa and Grant, for helping coordinate this entire mini book series. So Product Fest, if you guys want to hear more and meet Bruce in person and have him sign your book of Aligned, he is going to be our closing keynote on June 4th in Richmond, Virginia. And for those of you that don't know, Richmond is also known, AKA, as Tech's most creative city. And Product Fest is a really unique experience. I don't know so for those of you that have never been or never heard of Product Fest before, it's a one-day event in Richmond that is definitely about thought leaders and speakers and panel discussions. And it's really a festival. It is intentionally named to celebrate the practice and the profession of product management. And we're not just talking about product managers here. We're also talking about engineers and designers and UX researchers and data analysts and business analysts and go-to-market marketing product marketers, the whole nine yards. And also because practicing product is such an art and a science, we intentionally have this event in a historic theater in downtown Richmond. So you can see on the top image there how we had the panel. You can't see the whole theater, but that's on a theater stage. And also in alignment with the theme of the festival, we also we end the formal programming right around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we throw a block party. We shut down the city street in front of the theater, and we have this block party. So you can see all the folks having a great time out on the streets in front of the theater from years past. So Grant, if you don't mind showing that QR code one last time, we are so excited to have you all here today. And we want to invite all of you to Richmond. And so please enter your name into this QR code, the super quick form, and we will do a live drawing right now to see who has won the free pair of tickets. So I'm just going to give it one more second.
I'll bring my Sharpie.
Please do, Bruce. Please do. Okay. All right. So give me 1 second to enter. If somebody can just in the comments or a thumbs up that everybody has entered. Oh, I see some more names flying in, so into the back end here. So I'll give it another 30 seconds. So Bruce and Melissa, if you want to say anything more while the names are flowing in, I will go on mute while we collect more names for the free ticket giveaway.
For the book club folks in particular, or anybody who wants to read the book, I just want to say I recommend the print version rather than the Kindle. The Kindle is fine. It has all the same words and all the same illustrations. But we worked really hard with our designer, Michael Collins, to make it what Grant said, a referenceable book. Like you open up a page and you get all of the 4 different organization types on 2 side-by-side pages with an explanation of each one and examples of each one. And so you're not having to flip back and forth, which is my most annoying thing on Kindle, is flipping around, trying to get to compare things that should be side by side. So that's my recommendation. I know Kindle is cheaper and more portable, but we worked really hard on making the material accessible through the design. And I think you'll see the difference when you get it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And before this call started, Grant was even telling me how the audiobook, I believe he has the audiobook and as well as the physical copy. And he's enjoying that interaction of consuming the content in those two mediums.
Yeah, if you get the audiobook and we've listened to it and it is a good reading of the book, do make sure that you get the PDF or a physical copy of the book along with, so that you can refer back, because the book is full of diagrams. I don't think we anticipated that when we got into it, but it really makes it so much easier to follow along.
Mary, do you want to go there, or do you want to do a couple lightning round questions?
Well, actually, it is 12:58 p.m. by my watch. So, and I am seeing commentary in the chat that everybody has entered the giveaway that wishes to do so.
Let's go for it.
So, okay, just 1 second. I need to get my screen share up and triple check nobody else has added their name to the list. Hold on, everybody. I'm almost there. Oh, I see some names that I recognize on this list. I promise it's a fair. Hold on, share screen. Just 1 second, guys.
Nobody leave. I have one more thing. Even if you don't win, do not leave.
It's a Steve Jobs moment.
That's right.
Gosh. Okay. So I apologize. I am having difficulty with the screen share, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different names entered into the giveaway, and I'm going to go ahead and do the spin.
I've seen this. It's really truly random. It's an online random number generator, essentially, that spins a wheel and picks a name.
Okay, the winner is Catherine McKenzie. And I'm so sorry. I don't know why the StreamYard isn't letting me screen share with that right now. But I'm going to grab a screenshot of this winner. So if anybody wants to see that and all the names that were entered, I'm absolutely happy to do that and share that with all of you. Mm-hmm. But Catherine McKenzie, congratulations. I will be in touch with you offline to make sure you get the appropriate deets in order to claim your pair of tickets. And we look forward to seeing you on June 4th.
And for everyone else, but wait, there's more. Product Fest is willing to give all of us with ProductTank 10% off. This is going to be a limited time, but what's awesome about this is that we still have early bird pricing for about another week. So that's 10% off the early bird pricing. Make sure you get that in. This QR code will pitch you right over to the site with that promo code already there. Or if you wind up there later, remember PTank25 for your 10% off. And we're right at the end of the hour, so I think we'll do it. We'll cut it there for questions. We have another session in about 6 weeks. Please get the book. Please submit your stories, and we'll see you back here shortly.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.